3 hours. Michael Carter had counted every minute in the cold glass lobby of Harper and Blythe Capital, his worn briefcase warm against his palms, his scuffed shoes drawing a glance from the receptionist that slid quickly away. White men in tailored suits glided past him into the elevators and rose to the top of the tower, while the same smooth answer kept arriving. The CEO is in a meeting. Just a few more minutes. 40 floors above, Allison Harper had decided who he was by his skin and his cheap coat. The quiet thing in that briefcase was about to undo her. The rain had started before dawn, and by the time Michael Carter pulled his sedan up to the curb outside Lincoln Elementary, the wipers were losing the fight against it. Zoe sat in the back, 8 years old and unbothered by the weather, her backpack half open across her lap, and a stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. "You promised," she said, leaning forward between the seats. 3 o'clock, not 3:30, not 4, 3. She held up 3 fingers in case there was any doubt about the math. Michael agreed, twisting around to check the strap of her bag. Her hair was uneven where he had tried to braid it that morning, one side tighter than the other, and she had not complained once. That was the thing about Zoe. She forgave the small failures and held him to the big promises. He pulled a clean ribbon from the cup holder and tied it loosely around the looser braid, the way her mother might have, and she rolled her eyes at him and let him do it. She dug into her pocket and pulled out a square of folded paper and pressed it into his hand. "Lucky charm," she said. "I drew it last night while you were on the phone. Put it in your pocket so the meeting goes good." He unfolded it carefully, a lopsided yellow sun in one corner. A stick figure in a blue tie with brown skin like his, smiling so wide the mouth ran off the chin. A smaller figure beside it, holding its hand, with a triangle dress and one braid tighter than the other. Around them, a wobbly heart in red crayon, drawn the way an 8-year-old draws a fortress. "Right here," he said, folding it again and slipping it into the inside pocket of his jacket, over his chest. "Won't lose it." She kissed his cheek, smelling of cereal and morning shampoo, and bolted into the rain, and he watched until the school door swallowed her. Then he sat for a moment longer than he needed, listening to the engine tick, and let himself feel the quiet weight of being the only one she had. He had dressed simply that morning. There had not been time for anything else. Lunch packed, braid attempted, permission slip signed, and the gray jacket and unpolished shoes were what came to hand. It did not trouble him. The men he respected most had never once asked him about his tailor. He had built Carter Strategic Holdings on a single belief learned the hard way in the years after his wife Maya died of an aneurysm at 31 and left him with an infant daughter and a grief he could not name. You learned everything you needed to know about a person by watching how they treated someone who could do nothing for them. He had been watching for almost 40 years. A black boy in a white classroom in Gary, Indiana. A black scholarship student in a white business school in Cambridge. A black founder pitching white rooms full of polite, careful faces that had already decided what kind of fund he could possibly be running. The rule had never once failed him. The men who looked through him on first glance were the men who would have left a stranger bleeding on the road. The men who met his eyes were the men he could build a firm with. Today, he intended to learn that about Harper and Blythe. He pointed the car east toward downtown Chicago, with the lucky charm pressed quietly against his heart, and the rain ran down the windshield in long silver lines. Michael pushed through the glass doors of Harper and Blythe Capital at 9 o'clock sharp, shaking the rain from his sleeves, and before he had taken 3 steps, a uniformed guard moved into his path with the polite stiffness of a man who had been trained never to call it what it was. "Excuse me, sir. Do you have an appointment?" The guard was white, perhaps 50, with the careful expression of someone who believed he was only doing his job. Behind Michael, 2 white men in long overcoats pushed through the same doors, laughing about traffic on Wacker Drive, and the guard's eyes flicked over them and back without a word. They walked through unchecked, straight to the elevators. Michael answered evenly that he did, and gave the name. The guard nodded and stepped aside without apology, his eyes already past Michael toward the next person coming through the door. The exchange had taken 12 seconds. It had also taken a lifetime, and Michael had been keeping count of those exchanges for as long as he could remember. He filed this one away beside the rest and kept walking. He crossed the polished stone floor to the reception desk, where a young woman whose name tag read Brittany looked up with a smile that arranged itself the moment she saw him. She typed his name into the system, her eyebrows pulled together in a small, surprised line. When the appointment loaded on her screen, she read it twice. She glanced up at him, then back at the screen, then up again, the calculation visible behind her eyes. Then she looked back at him with the particular brightness reserved for people who had wandered into the wrong building. "Mr. Carter, if you'd like to have a seat, I'll let them know you're here." Her gaze dropped to his scuffed shoes, the off-the-rack jacket, the briefcase that had clearly traveled a long road. The smile held. The eyes did not. He thanked her by name and chose a chair near the corner, low and uncomfortable, and set the briefcase on his lap. Brittany was already on her phone, turned slightly away, speaking quickly to someone he could not hear. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He drew it out. A photo from the after-school program at Lincoln Elementary, sent at Zoe's insistence. His daughter held up a fresh painting, a brown dog grinning with a gap where a tooth used to be, and her smile in the picture was bigger than the dog's. The caption underneath read, "In the careful printing of the program director, Zoe says, 'This is for Daddy's important day. Tell him good luck.'" He typed back a row of stars, and a heart, and one word, "Beautiful." Then he set the phone face down on the briefcase and looked out at the lobby. The rain still fell beyond the great glass walls, gray and unhurried, blurring the headlights of cars on Wacker Drive. The elevators hummed up and down their bright shafts. Somewhere far above him, decisions were being made about who deserved to ride up and who would sit and wait. He had walked into rooms like this his entire career. He had learned not to flinch when the air changed around him. He had learned, more importantly, to read what the change told him. He folded his hands on the briefcase, the lucky charm a small warm pressure inside his jacket, and settled in to learn exactly what kind of building this was. An hour passed, and then another. The elevators kept their rhythm. Each time Michael approached the desk, Brittany answered without quite looking at him. "The CEO is running just a bit behind. We have a priority client upstairs at the moment. The schedule has shifted slightly, but it shouldn't be much longer." The smile was unchanged. The eyes never landed. He thanked her each time, by name, and went back to his chair and did not press her, because pressing was the trap. Pressing was what would let her say later, with practiced sympathy, that he had been aggressive. He had been watching the pattern from the first hour. A pair of white men in pressed charcoal suits arrived at 9:30, were greeted by name, and were waved into the elevators within 12 minutes. A trio of investors swept in out of the rain just before 10, shook out their coats, and were escorted upward before they had finished shaking. An Asian businessman with a leather portfolio sat across from Michael for 40 minutes, then was finally walked to the elevator with quiet apologies, the receptionist using the word delay twice in 2 sentences, as if repetition might smooth it. And then there was Michael, in his gray jacket and scuffed shoes, with his dark skin and his patient hands folded on the briefcase. The chair did not move. The elevator doors did not open for him. He kept his face still. He kept his breathing slow. He did not look once at the clock above the desk. Behind his calm, the count kept itself, and he let it. It was the older woman who finally broke the silence around him. She came from somewhere behind the desk with a paper cup of water and set it on the small side table by his elbow, lowering her voice as if she were doing something against the rules. Her badge read Linda. She was black, perhaps 60, with iron gray hair pulled back into a neat bun, and the steady eyes of a person who had survived a great deal of quiet wrong by remembering all of it. "I'm sorry about the wait, Mr. Carter," she said. "It isn't right, the way they do it sometimes. I've worked this lobby for 11 years. I've seen who gets sent up and who gets left down here. There's a pattern to it, and I have never once liked it." She did not say more than that. She did not have to. The two of them held each other's gaze for a long moment, and a great deal passed between them that did not need words. Michael looked at her, really looked. The The way he looked at everyone, the rest of the building had decided not to. "Thank you, Linda," he said. "That's the kindest thing anyone has said to me all day." She gave him a small, tired smile and went back to her post. He understood she had not brought the water for thirst. She had brought it as a small flag planted in his corner of the lobby, a quiet message to a man being made to wait that someone in this building had noticed and could no longer pretend not to. He did not drink from the cup. He let it sit there beside him as the proof it was meant to be. Across the lobby, Brittany glanced once at the water and looked quickly away. And Michael saw her see it, and he understood that Linda had paid some small price by setting it there. His phone buzzed. "Zoe. Daddy, what time is it? Are you still coming at 3? He typed back, his thumbs steady. "Soon, sweetheart. I promise." He pressed send and felt the promise settle on his chest, beside the folded crayon drawing, and the weight of it was not light. It was nearly noon when a young assistant in a slim black skirt finally appeared in the lobby with a clipboard and a rehearsed apology, and led Michael into a private elevator that rose so smoothly he barely felt it move. The doors opened on the 40th floor, onto a corridor of polished glass and gray marble, and at the end of it, a conference room hung in the air over the city like a small clear box. The city of Chicago spread out below in long gray streaks of rain, the river a dull silver thread between the buildings. At the head of the long table sat Allison Harper. She was younger than he had expected, sharp-featured, blonde hair drawn back so tightly it pulled at her temples, in a charcoal suit cut so precisely it looked architectural. A tablet lay in front of her, and a phone face up beside it. She did not stand. She did not extend a hand. She gestured at a chair near the far end of the table, not the one beside her, and offered him a smile that was a perfect imitation of warmth and never reached her eyes. "Mr. Carter, I appreciate your patience. We run a tight schedule here. I'm sure you understand." Her eyes moved over him as he sat down in a single practice sweep. The gray jacket, the scuffed shoes, the brown skin, the calm hands. Every observation slid into a column, and the column told her a story she had read 100 times and never once questioned. The story always ended the same way. This man did not belong on the 40th floor. She slid a thin folder across the polished surface in his general direction. "I'll be candid," she said. "We handle accounts of considerable size here. Given your situation, I've had my team prepare an overview of our entry-level managed services. It's a sound place to start. Builds a track record over time." Her phone lit up. She picked it up, read it, answered 3 lines of an email without excusing herself, and set it down again, all while Michael sat with the folder unopened in front of him. "I'll be honest with you, because I think honesty saves everyone time. A decision of any real size is something you'd want to bring to a financial advisor first, someone who's walked clients through this process before. I'd hate for you to feel out of your depth here. We have platinum-tier clients who've been with this firm for 30 years. Real institutional weight. Old money. New money done right. That's the company you'd be keeping. I want to make sure you're comfortable before we talk about anything ambitious." Her tone was generous. The way the word generous is used, when generosity is also a kind of dismissal. What Allison Harper understood in that moment was very little. She did not understand that the firm had just survived a brutal fiscal year on the back of a leveraged position she had personally championed and watched collapse. She did not understand that Jonathan Blythe, the aging co-founder whose father's name still hung in brass above the lobby, had given her a private ultimatum she had told no one about: land the $500 million fund that was coming or surrender the chair at the next quarterly meeting. Jonathan had never quite believed a woman barely past 40 could carry his father's company, and she had spent 11 months proving him wrong, sleeping 4 hours a night and answering emails at 3 in the morning, and the proof depended entirely on a transfer from a private fund she had never bothered to picture as belonging to an actual person. The fund had been a number on a slide. The signature had been a formality her assistant would chase. She certainly had not pictured this person. Michael let her finish all of it. He had learned long ago that people told you exactly who they were if you simply gave them enough silence to do it in. He folded his hands on the table, the cuff of his unremarkable jacket riding up over a watch that wasn't worth a second glance, and waited until she had said every word she meant to say. "Your platinum tier clients," he said at last. "The ones with the real weight. That's right, and I'd be starting at the bottom. Entry level. Building a track record." There was nothing sharp in his voice. He might have been confirming the weather. "It is not an insult, Mr. Carter," Allison said, the smile reassembling. "It's a process. A perfectly normal process for someone in your position." He nodded slowly, as if absorbing wisdom. Then he reached down, unlatched the worn briefcase, and drew out a bound document nearly an inch thick. Its cover stamped with the letterhead of Harper and Blythe Capital, its pages tabbed and initialed in a dozen places. He laid it on the table and turned it to face her, his motion unhurried, the way a man sets down a stone he has been carrying all morning. "Then perhaps you can tell me," he said, "why your own legal department spent the last 3 weeks drafting this." Allison's eyes dropped to the cover, and Michael watched the color leave her face in real time. It was the fund transfer agreement, $500 million moving from Carter Strategic Holdings into the management of Harper and Blythe. The single largest acquisition the firm would book that year. The transfer her own people had been chasing across a dozen meetings while she sat upstairs deciding who deserved the elevator. The signature line at the bottom, the line everything depended on, waited for one name, his. Her voice caught. She looked from the document to the man at the end of her table, at the gray jacket and the scuffed shoes and the brown skin she had dismissed at a glance, and the entire morning rearranged itself behind her eyes. "You're Carter." "The Carter Strategic. It's my name on the fund," he said quietly. "It tends to be." Allison moved fast then, the way capable people move when the ground shifts under them. She set the phone face down. She leaned forward, her smile reassembling into something earnest, her words coming smooth. "Mr. Carter, I owe you an enormous apology. This is a genuine misunderstanding. The intake process downstairs is standard. The way it was handled was unacceptable. Let me get the partners in here. We can have this signed within the hour. From this moment forward, the treatment will reflect exactly what an account of this magnitude deserves." She reached for the agreement, drawing it toward her side of the table, as if proximity might close the deal. Michael spoke without moving. "That," he said, "is precisely the problem." She stopped. "You just told me the treatment will reflect the magnitude of the account." He stood, unhurried, and buttoned the gray jacket that had told her everything she thought she needed to know. 3 hours ago, when you believed I was a black man in cheap shoes with nothing to offer you, that told me how this firm treats people it has decided are beneath it. The $500 million did not change who I am, Miss Harper. It only changed what you think I am worth." He picked up the briefcase. "I came looking for somewhere that respected people before they knew the balance sheet. This is not it." He walked out. He rode the elevator down through the tower, past the floors that had sent men up while they left him sitting, and crossed the cold stone lobby. At the desk, he stopped beside Linda. 11 years, he said quietly. "You may find that worth remembering before too long." Then he pushed out into the downpour. The board met the morning after, and Allison Harper sat through 40 minutes of silence that was worse than shouting. Jonathan Blythe did not raise his voice. He never did. He sat at the far end of the table where her father had once sat, his hands folded over a cane he did not strictly need, and let the others ask the questions, while he watched her, with the flat patience of a man who had expected exactly this. The Carter Fund was gone. The largest acquisition of the year, the one she had promised them in language she now wished she could take back, had walked out of a glass conference room because, in here, a board member read aloud from a note someone had taken. The prospective client felt mistreated during intake. "Mistreated," Jonathan repeated. It was the only word he said for a long while. Allison should have told them the truth then. The truth was small and survivable. She had misjudged a man. She had been arrogant. She would repair it. But the chair beneath her felt suddenly temporary, so she did the thing that would unmake her. She defended herself. With respect, she said, "I don't believe the firm should bend its entire reputation around the wounded feelings of one investor. Carter Strategic is run by a man who made a $500 million decision on the basis of how long he sat in a lobby. That isn't institutional discipline. That's temperament." She gathered herself, gaining momentum the way she always did when she was frightened. He's also, and I say this carefully, a single father stretched across more than any one person should reasonably carry. Raising a black child, alone in this climate, running a fund that size. Something had to give. It's not unsympathetic to wonder if it already has. Jonathan looked at her for a moment that went on too long. "See that you do," he said, and reached for his cane, and the meeting was over. She told herself she had bought time. What she had actually done was commit in front of 9 witnesses to a version of events in which Michael Carter was the unstable one, and now she had to make the rest of the world believe it, or be exposed as the woman who had lost $500 million to her own contempt. So she began to make calls. They were careful calls, the kind that left no fingerprints. She cornered contacts at industry lunches and over drinks at the rooftop bar at the top of her own building, and she never said anything so crude as a lie. She worried aloud. She wondered, between sips, whether anyone else had noticed how emotional Carter had become lately. How a man running a fund that size could afford to make decisions on feeling rather than fundamentals. She lingered on the word aggressive, used carefully and only when the room would receive it. He'd been aggressive in the meeting. Not threatening, of course, just, aggressive. The word did exactly what she meant it to do. It traveled into rooms full of men who had been taught to hear it a certain way when it was used about a certain kind of man, and it lodged there without ever being challenged. She added, almost as an afterthought, that she had so much respect for what he was trying to do. Single father, raising a black child in this city. She would shake her head slowly, the picture of sympathy, and the men across from her would shake their heads back. Within 10 days, 2 of Carter Strategic's longtime partners postponed scheduled meetings with vague apologies. A fund manager who had taken Michael's calls for 6 years stopped returning them. The whisper moved through the financial district faster than any press release. Carter was erratic. Carter was distracted. Carter was a single black father in over his head. Michael felt the cold front move in before he understood its source. He noticed it first in the small things: a partner's clipped email, a lunch quietly rescheduled, a tone on the phone that had not been there a month ago. It was Rebecca Collins who named it for him. His attorney for the better part of a decade. She had a way of saying hard things plainly, and she said this one over a speakerphone while he helped Zoe with long division at the kitchen table. "It's Harper," Rebecca said. "I've heard her name in 3 different rooms this week, always near yours. Always with that same little frown attached. She's not coming at you with a lawsuit. She's coming at your reputation, and she picked the one angle that's hardest to fight, because you can't disprove a feeling. She's telling people you're emotional. She's telling them you're stretched thin because of your daughter. She's using the word aggressive about you, in rooms where that word means what it has always meant." Michael's hand stilled over the page. Zoe glanced up at him, and he gave her a small nod and went back to the problem. "Let her say it," he said quietly into the phone. "The people who matter will know it's not true." He believed it then. He would stop believing it soon. What he did not yet know was that Allison had already moved past whispers. She had gone looking for something with teeth, and her lawyers had found it. For 2 years, Michael had been pursuing the acquisition of National Freight, a regional shipping company with 9,000 employees, a fleet of aging trucks, and a balance sheet that needed exactly the kind of patient capital he specialized in. A substantial portion of the funds, $200 million, sat in escrow, waiting on a final round of regulatory clearance before release. It was a clean arrangement, the kind he had done a dozen times. Except for one detail he had never had cause to think twice about. The escrow account was held and administered by Harper and Blythe Capital. The relationship predated the disaster in the conference room by more than a year. It had been arranged by the firm's institutional services division, long before Allison had ever heard Michael's name. Allison found it the way a drowning person finds a rope. She had her legal team comb the escrow agreement line by line, and buried in the release conditions they found a clause. Ambiguous, poorly drafted, it referenced satisfactory confirmation of the acquiring party's financial standing before disbursement. In the hands of a determined attorney, it became a door. She did not act outside the law. That was what made it so dangerous. She instructed her lawyers to formally raise a dispute over whether Carter Strategic's financial standing had been satisfactorily confirmed, citing in writing the very rumors she had planted. On that basis, Harper and Blythe froze the $200 million in escrow pending review. It was elegant, and it was vicious. She had used a real clause, and the doubt she herself had manufactured to lock the door on the most important deal of his life. The freeze landed on a Tuesday. Rebecca called him at home, and Michael listened to her lay it out with the cold clarity he relied on her for. If the escrow was not released before the regulatory window closed in 6 weeks, the National Freight acquisition would collapse. 9,000 people who had no idea his name even existed would learn through layoff notices that a company they had never heard of had decided their fate in a conference room over a personal grudge. Across the kitchen table, Zoe looked up from her homework. "Daddy," she said softly, "you're squeezing my pencil really hard." Michael looked at her, 8 years old, watching him with the steady, serious eyes he loved more than anything in the world. He set the pencil down carefully. He smiled at her, pulled the bowl of cut apple slices closer to her side, and asked how the next problem was going. And she went back to it. He sat with the phone and the truth in his chest and understood that this had stopped being about the contract a long time ago. The article landed on a Thursday morning, and by 9 o'clock it sat on every desk in the financial district. The publication mattered, the kind that arrived in the inbox of every fund manager in the country before their first cup of coffee, and the piece itself had been written with a craftsman's hand. It never accused him of anything. That was its genius. It was a long, sympathetic, devastating profile of the reclusive Michael Carter, and it wondered gently, reasonably, in the voice of a friend, whether one man could truly carry the weight of a $500 million fund, while also, as a devoted single father, carrying the weight of a child. It quoted unnamed sources close to the industry. It used words like emotional, overextended, increasingly difficult to reach. It noted, with a careful sigh dressed as concern, the unique pressures on a black father raising a daughter alone in a city that was not always kind to either of them. It painted a portrait of a good man who was simply, tragically, not up to the job anymore. It was Allison's whispers set in type, dressed in concern, impossible to sue. The damage was immediate. A strategic client of 9 years, an institution whose name carried real weight, announced it was suspending its partnership with Carter Strategic pending clarity. The calls Michael had stopped getting were replaced by calls he did not want. Investors asking in carefully neutral voices whether everything was all right, whether he was all right, whether the firm was, as they put it, with great delicacy, stable. He read the article twice at his kitchen table and felt something he had not felt since the early days after Maya died. The sense that the ground he stood on was not in fact solid, and that no amount of being right could make it so. For the first time in his career, the thing he had built with patience and quiet competence was being dismantled, not by a failure of his work, but by the suggestion that his love for his daughter was a liability, and the color of his skin was a question mark. He did not hear Zoe come in. She was standing in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, the tablet in her hands, and her face had the careful, frightened stillness of a child who had understood more of an overheard conversation than she was meant to. He had been on the phone with Rebecca an hour earlier, and he had not been as quiet as he had thought. "Daddy," she said. Her voice was very small. "The people who are mad at you, the ones saying you're not good at your job anymore." She looked down at the tablet, then back up at him. "Is it because of me? Because you have to take care of me? So they think you can't do the other stuff too?" The kitchen went silent around them. Michael crossed the room and knelt down so that his eyes were level with hers, and he took the tablet gently out of her hands and set it on the counter. of everything Allison Harper had done. The weight, the contempt, the whispers, the freeze, the article. Nothing had reached him. He had built himself to absorb all of it. But this reached him. She had found the one place he could be hurt, and she did not even know it existed. "Look at me," he said, and his voice was steady because he made it steady. "You are not the reason for anything except the good things. Do you understand me? Some people think that taking care of someone you love makes you weak. They've got it exactly backwards. It is the strongest thing a person can do." He tucked a strand of her uneven hair behind her ear. "And some people, baby girl, see a man who looks like your daddy doing something they don't think a man who looks like him is supposed to do, and they say words about him until other people start to believe those words. That is on them, not on him, and not ever on you. Promise," she whispered. He thought of the crayon drawing still folded in his jacket pocket, the lucky charm she had given him on the worst morning of his professional life. "I promise," he said. He pulled her into him and held her, and over her shoulder his eyes went hard. Kneeling there on the kitchen floor, Michael Carter stopped trying to wait the storm out. Michael started where the rot started, with the people Harper and Blythe had thrown away. Rebecca built the list, and Michael made the calls himself because he had learned long ago that people who had been made to feel worthless could tell the difference between a man gathering ammunition and a man who actually wanted to hear them. He drove to suburbs and small bungalows and sat across from former clients who had spent years assuming the humiliation had been theirs alone to carry. There was the retired black school teacher in a neat house on the South Side who had inherited a little money from her late husband and been steered into the worst products the firm offered, then dropped the moment a wealthier prospect appeared. There was the Latino small business owner in Pilsen who had been shown the door because his account was not a fit for the firm's profile. There was the elderly Korean couple in Lincoln Park who had lost the savings of 40 years of dry cleaning. One by one, they agreed to put their names to sworn statements. Not for a lawsuit. For the truth, gathered in one place where it could finally be seen all at once. Then he went to Linda. She had left Harper and Blythe 2 months earlier, eased out in the quiet way the firm handled people who saw too much, and she met him at a diner in Bronzeville with her hands folded around a coffee cup. 11 years, she said. I watched who they sent up and who they left sitting. I kept things, not because I was planning anything, just because somebody should have. Memos, names, the complaints that disappeared, the settlements with the little NDAs stapled to the back. She slid a worn folder across the table. I always wondered who I was keeping it for. Michael set his hand on the folder. You were kind to me when you thought I was nobody, he said. That's the only reason any of this is happening. She gave him the same tired, knowing smile she had given him in the lobby. Then use it well, Mr. Carter. Rebecca found the keystone on a Friday night and called him at midnight. Allison authorized the escrow freeze herself, she said. She used the firm's legal team. She invoked the dispute clause, and there is no record, anywhere, that she ever cleared it with Jonathan Blythe. In a firm structured like theirs, an action of that size against a counterparty has to go through the co-founder. He holds an absolute veto. She went around him. She violated their own governance rules because she could not risk him asking why she was picking a war with the man she had just lost. Michael understood the shape of the choice in front of him. He could fight Allison in the open and lose, because that was the ground she had chosen. Or he could go to the one man who could undo all of it from the inside, the co-founder she had betrayed without his knowing. He chose the second path. Jonathan Blythe received him in a wood-paneled office that the modern building had been designed around, an old man's room preserved inside a young firm's headquarters. He listened without interrupting while Michael laid it out, document by document. The pattern of mistreated clients, sorted by year and by name and by skin. The buried settlements, the whisper campaign, the escrow freeze, authorized in Allison's name alone, in plain breach of the governance rules Jonathan's own father had written. When Michael finished, the old man sat for a long moment with his hands folded over his cane. You could have taken this to a court, Jonathan said finally. You'd have had cause. Why bring it to me? Because a courtroom punishes a person, Michael said. You can fix the thing that made her. I didn't lose a contract that morning, Mr. Blythe. I found out what your firm does to people who can't do anything for it, and what it does to people who look like me. My father used to say you could measure a man by how he treated the waiter, Jonathan said. I've spent 30 years forgetting that. He drew the file toward him. Leave it. All of it. What followed moved faster than the months of damage that preceded it. Jonathan voided the escrow freeze outright, as an unauthorized action in breach of the firm's governance, and the $200 million was released within 48 hours, well inside the regulatory window. He convened the board, laid the file before them, and called for a full internal investigation into the firm's client treatment practices and into the conduct of its chief executive. The national freight acquisition closed on schedule, and 9,000 people who would never know Michael's name kept their jobs through a winter that could have ended very differently. Allison came to see him on a gray afternoon at his small office. She had not called ahead. She looked smaller than she had at the head of that glass table, the armor gone, something raw underneath it. I didn't come to ask for the fund back, she said. I know it's gone. I came because I need to understand what I did. Not the freeze, not the article. I mean the first morning, the 3 hours. I grew up watching people decide I didn't matter. And I swore I'd claw my way up to where nobody could ever look at me like that again. And the second I got there, the first thing I did with all that power was look at you exactly the way they used to look at me. And worse, I took every cheap thing this country teaches about a black man in a cheap suit, and I used it as a filing system. Michael was quiet. A long moment. You want to know why I made you wait 3 hours, he said at last. I don't decide what a person is worth by what they can do for me. I decide it by how they treat someone who can't do anything for them at all. That morning, you thought I was nobody. So you showed me exactly who you are when you think no one important is watching. The tragedy isn't that you were cruel to a rich man by accident. It's that you'd have been just as cruel to the man you thought I was. There's a retired teacher in Bronzeville, a woman named Linda who kept 11 years of your firm's secrets. They're who you owe, not me. She stood, and at the door she stopped and turned back. You treated me better than I treated you, she said. That was never about you, Michael said. It's about who I want my daughter to think her father is. And then she was gone. That Thursday, Michael Carter pulled his sedan up to the curb outside Lincoln Elementary. Exactly as he had on the morning all of this began. The light was gold now instead of gray, the rain long gone. Zoe came barreling out through the doors, with her uneven braid bouncing and her backpack half open, the way she always did. She climbed into the back seat. Did you win? She asked. Michael reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and drew out a square of folded paper, a crayon sun, a stick figure in a tie with brown skin like his, a smaller figure holding its hand, worn soft at the creases now from weeks of being carried over his heart. He held it up so she could see he had kept it. You know, he said, I don't think winning was ever really the point. The point was to not turn into the kind of person I wouldn't want you to grow up to be. He started the car. Everything else was just paperwork. Can we get pizza? She asked. We can absolutely get pizza, Michael said, and pulled away from the curb into the gold evening light, his daughter's lucky charm over his heart. For the first time in a long time, there was nowhere in the world he would rather be, and no one he would rather be than exactly the man he was.